Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Good evening. My name is Russell Brooks. Tonight's show will focus on the Democratic Party and its prospects for the upcoming midterm elections. Control of the U.S. House and Senate will be on the line. For Democrats to take control, they will have to overcome challenges such as the fallout from its controversial autopsy of the 2024 presidential campaign, the emergence of the Democratic Socialists of America, and the collapse of its candidate in the Maine Senate race. These are interesting times for the party, to say the least. Joining me tonight to cover these topics and more is Harry Khanna. Mr. Khanna is one of Virginia's representatives on the Democratic National Committee. Harry, welcome to Inside Scoop.
Thank you, Russell. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Now let's start with what can only be described as a debacle in the Maine Senate race. What is your take on what transpired with the former Democratic Senate candidate, Graham Plattner?
Yeah, Graham Plattner struck a real chord with the people of Maine when he won that primary as he did. And it says something that Maine Democratic voters chose him. That said, his personal scandals got in the way. And he had a phenomenal message that resonated with people really well, but his personal scandals sank him. And I think he had a lot of those scandals come out before the primary, and he survived them. But I think what happened was, when the Senate caucus was deciding, okay, if this is going to be our candidate, we're going to put resources towards him, they had to sit down with him. And I believe they asked him point blank, are there any other scandals that are going to come out, or is this it? And I believe he looked them in the eye and he said, this is it. And then another explosive scandal comes out. So I believe that this scandal, this opposition research is something the Collins campaign had. They have it. I've heard they have worse things on him, and so this was about as good of timing as we could have gotten, right? If those scandals had come out a week later, Graham Plattner's name would have been on the ballot, and there would have been nothing the Maine Democratic Party could have done about it. So that's where we are.
Interesting. Now, many point out that President Trump overcame accusations of sexual assault, payments to a porn star, and supporting an insurrection. Why are the rules different for Democrats?
I think Democrats believe in good government. They believe in a government that works, that is not corrupt, that is run by people who are public servants. And the modern Republican Party doesn't value that. And it's a real difference of values. And it makes it harder to win and hold on to power, because Democrats hold their candidates to standards. And Democrats will abide, I think, in the Trump era, some amount of scandal. I think they were willing to abide Mr. Plattner's tattoo scandal, his Reddit comment scandal. But there's a line. There's a line that when you cross it, you lose the rank and file Democrats, and I think Mr. Plattner crossed it.
So as you said, he survived his Nazi tattoo, sexual texts while married, social media posts disparaging minorities and women. But finally, I guess you're suggesting an accusation of rape was a bridge too far.
I think rape is a bridge too far for Democrats. I think 10 years ago the bar was maybe a little higher, and maybe some of those other scandals might have sunk a candidate. But I think people have seen Donald Trump get away with murder, and they've lowered the bar a little bit. But Democrats are not willing to put the bar on the ground.
Okay. Now, as you said, despite all of this, Plattner built an incredible following among Maine voters, or at least Maine Democrats. Some contend it was because he had the working class appearance and rhetoric that the Democratic Party is searching for, while others suggest that maybe it's another manifestation of the anger and frustration that many have with the party establishment. What do you say?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's a little bit of both. I think people liked his aesthetic, and they liked what he stood for, that he was willing to call out things plainly, did not was not worried about, whether he's going to get corporate donations, was willing to call out the influence of extreme wealth on our political system, and just came off as really authentic. And people want that. People want authenticity, and he gave it to them. Unfortunately, it came with a lot of personal scandals. So my hope is that whoever he's replaced with has that same authenticity, is able to tap into that same vein of excitement that Graham Plattner was, but without the personal scandals that I think would have sunk him in the general election.
Now, I'm going to challenge you a bit. You said he came across as authentic, but was it real? He came across as this working class hero, the veteran oyster man, but we know he went to private schools. We know that he wasn't quite what he appeared to be, and as opposed to him being this authentic candidate to some degree, he was found and developed by Democratic consultants. Morris Katz, Mamdani's consultant being one of them. They scoured Maine for someone that they thought would be the type of candidate that could beat Susan Collins. They selected him. He certainly did well, but I question whether it was an authentic candidate as being suggested.
Well, I think there's probably two different things here. One is, I think you can be authentic and be authentically pro-worker and anti-wealth inequality and pro-middle class. You can be all those things authentically even if you went to private school, even if you own the oyster business, don't just work in it. So I guess I'd push back a little bit there, is that I think he could still be authentic in that respect. On the other hand, I hear what you're saying about consultants picking him, and I don't like that. I think that is stupid that these consultants do that. It's unfortunate. But I'll also say that it's not like there was another candidate that was really taking the hearts of Maine Democrats. The DSCC put up Janet Mills. I don't know if they were formally supporting her, but everyone knew they were supporting her. But Governor Mills clearly didn't have her heart in it. She did not want to be running for this. It showed in the kind of campaign she ran, and didn't want to be a senator. And of the two, people were more excited by Graham Plattner than they were by Janet Mills. They thought Graham Plattner could be the one to beat Susan Collins, not Janet Mills. And I don't know that they were wrong. Graham Plattner, I think, absent his scandals, I think would have been a strong favorite to beat Susan Collins. But the consultants did not do the diligence they should have done, and we ended up in this situation.
Do you have a sense of what the Democratic Party in Maine should be looking for in a candidate who can beat Susan Collins?
I think they should try and align the candidate they choose. First of all, I'm not going to tell the Maine Democrats what to do. They have a process they're running. I think it is it's a convention, I think, of about 600 delegates organized by party committees. We have a similar process in Virginia we can run. And I'm not going to tell those delegates what to do, but if I were one of those Maine delegates, I would try and choose a candidate who was as close ideologically to Graham Plattner as could be. Because the last thing we want is for the folks who chose Mr. Plattner in the primary to feel like the establishment chose a corporate establishment Democrat and kicked out the progressive. That is not, I don't think that's anybody's intention, and I don't think that's the perception we should encourage by choosing a candidate that is not ideologically like Graham Plattner.
Sure. Now, what do you know of the process that will be utilized to select the candidate, whomever that will be?
It's a statewide convention. I think I mentioned Virginia has a similar process. I don't know it exactly, but the way a state convention typically would work, or would work in Virginia, is the local committees. So every county and city in Virginia has a local Democratic committee. They would have a caucus where basically you invite anybody who's a Democrat to come, and they sign a pledge saying, I'm a Democrat and I believe in democratic ideals, and anybody can show up. It's an open meeting. And those caucus members choose delegates from that locality. So Fairfax would have 30 delegates or something to a 600-person convention. And those caucus members who show up to the caucus that the Fairfax Democratic Committee organized would choose those 30 delegates to go to a state convention. Every other city and county committee did the same thing, and in total there's 600 delegates, and they have a convention. And a convention is like a big meeting where candidates are nominated, and they may give speeches, and they meet the delegates, and then they choose a candidate, they choose a nominee. And it is not as democratic as a primary, but I imagine holding a primary in the 1 week that there are 2 weeks the main Democrats have to choose a replacement nominee. I believe it's July 27th. I think this is not a bad process under the time pressure they're in.
Sure. I also understand that Graham Plattner attempted to have some say in what process was developed to select his successor, I guess we would say. Is that appropriate?
I mean, what is appropriate in a situation like this? This is such an unusual situation that I don't know what is appropriate versus not appropriate. I think it is. I am glad Graham Plattner withdrew. I think that was critical, and I'm glad he had the head to do that. I don't think it is inappropriate for him to say, voters chose me because of these stances, because of this point of view on the world and what I think a senator should be. I think that my replacement should generally reflect those same viewpoints. I don't think it's inappropriate for him to say that. Now, if he were saying, I'm only going to withdraw if you pick so-and-so as a candidate, I think that would be a little problematic. But I don't have a problem with him going out there and saying that I think this is what a candidate should look like. And it's basically just saying we should reflect the voters' preferences as consistently as we can.
And if Democrats fail to oust Senator Collins, what are their chances of taking control of the U.S. Senate?
Well, let's see. Let's see if I can count here. So let's assume we hold all the seats we have now. We hold Georgia, we hold Michigan. How many do we have to flip to take a majority? We need 51 seats in the Senate because Vice President Vance would break a tie.
You need 4.
So we need 4. So I can see the states that we would get, and I can count to 4. And I think our chances are probably maybe a coin flip, maybe a little worse than a coin flip.
Understood. Now we are going to have to pause our conversation with Harry Khanna of the Democratic National Committee for a short break, but please stay with us when we return with more Inside Scoop.
Okay, so we drowned the fire, stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. I already posted it.
I got a creak in my neck, limp in my step, cramping in my muscles every time I try to flex. But I don't wanna get on. Very sad, all that I can do was remember you. You know I usually stay now, but if you throw me love, I'll throw you some more.
It's a big responsibility.
Oh, it's huge. I know, it's huge.
And the salary.
Oh my god, yes. I mean,
Right?
like, I was about to move in with my parents, and right before, so this saved me.
I really believe in you, you know?
Thank you. It's nice to hear that from someone.
These are cool. Did you, what did
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
I'm Russell Brooks, joined by my guest, Democratic National Committee member Harry Khanna. Let's continue. A major story in this election cycle has been the emergence of the Democratic Socialists of America as a force in the Democratic Party primaries. Mamdani-backed candidates won 3 congressional primaries in New York City. A DSA candidate won a congressional primary in Colorado, and a Democratic Socialist candidate is leading in the race to be the Democratic nominee for governor in Wisconsin. It appears the far left is the most dynamic force in the party. Is that how you see it?
I think that the DSA is a wing of the Democratic Party, and it's one that I think the Democratic Party should welcome. We're a big tent. I mean, at this point, we're so big, we've basically got everyone from the DSA all the way to moderates who just believe in good government and not violently attempting a coup on the Capitol on January 6th. So we're a very big tent with a broad constituency. So you've got folks in the DSA who skew predominantly younger, who are excited, enthusiastic, have a point of view about what the world should be, about what this country should be. And they want a home in the Democratic Party, and I think we should give it to them. I think that they're an important voice who believes, I think affordability and cost of living is at the core of their message right now, and it's part of why it's become such a part of the Democratic Party's message. So the DSA has a point of view, it's an authentic point of view, it's sincerely held, and I think that we should engage with them and welcome them as an important constituency in the party.
Now, I remember after the governor elections in New Jersey and Virginia, the prevailing sentiment seemed to be that those sort of moderate governors, those sort of centrist candidates were the key to Democratic success. And they would provide the guideposts to how Democrats would prevail as in the midterms and conceivably in 2028. What happened?
I think people who juxtapose those two events, where you've got Virginia with a more moderate governor and New York City with a DSA mayor, the country's a big place, and different politics and different policy works in different states and different localities. And Virginia is a more moderate place than New York City, and so it makes sense that our governor would be more moderate than the mayor of New York. And so I think it is unwise, or maybe taking it too far, to try and divine the path of the party based on isolated events. So 2025 meant something for Virginia, it meant something for the party. Mamdani's election meant something for the party, but we are a constellation of a lot of different elections and a lot of different voters, and I wouldn't read too much into any one election.
Is Zohran Mamdani the star of the party right now? Is he the most significant player in Democratic politics as we speak?
I think he is inspiring a lot of people, and I think he is an incredibly rising star in the Democratic Party. And I think, ironically, one of the most interesting things about him is that he's ineligible to run for president. So he's not born in the United States. Mm-hmm. So you've got this situation where he is, if he were eligible, everyone would be talking, is Zohran Mamdani going to run for president? But because he's ineligible, it gives him a certain authenticity to what he's doing. Because when he freezes the rent in New York City, or when he just makes things better, when he makes the buses free, or whatever he's doing, people believe that he's doing that because he wants to do that, not because he wants to run for president. People love to ascribe presidential ambitions to every successful politician, and I think it is helpful to Zohran Mamdani that they can't do that with him.
Mm-hmm. Now also, is the success of DSA candidates due to the party's inability to come up with ideas to tackle the economic anxiety that many Americans face in their daily lives?
I think that's part of it. I think there's a lot of the establishment, quote unquote, folks who have been in office for a long time, who have spent 10 years positioning themselves against Donald Trump. Ever since he came down that golden escalator in 2015, we are not Donald Trump. And I think Vice President Harris suffered from some of that in her election. She was not Trump. She was against Trump, but there wasn't a whole lot of what she's for. And I do think that not standing for something is inauthentic. And voters hate inauthenticity. And they love authenticity. And the DSA, the members of the DSA, the folks who run as DSA members, there's one thing I can say about the DSA for sure, and I think that folks believe those things sincerely, and they are authentic, and I think that's part of what drives their success.
Okay. Now, the DSA and other progressives have also been highly critical of Democrats who support or accept support from AIPAC, the pro-Israel lobbying group. Those criticisms were instrumental in the DSA victories in New York City. There will be a major issue in Michigan, as an example. What effect will that approach have in these more purple areas of the country, like Michigan, like Virginia?
Well, I think the DSA has tapped into something there, which is the influence of money in politics is overwhelming. And it has become especially overwhelming after Citizens United. And I think that Democrats everywhere are sick of the influence of money in politics. And we could be talking about AIPAC, we could be talking about ZPAC, we could be talking about any of these big money PACs that like to decide primaries and general elections. So I think what we're seeing is voters tuning in to the fact that these ads they see on TV that are funded by candidates who receive these big corporate contributions, they're tuning into the fact that, hey, maybe this isn't the candidate for me, because maybe I want a candidate who isn't just getting all these contributions and then will just vote like Lockheed Martin wants or how AIPAC wants.
But in the Democratic Party, there seems to be a bit more than just the issue about who's funding them. There seems to be a break in the Democratic Party with its traditional approach to Israel. Rahm Emanuel was in Israel, and he spoke to that. He said that the traditional relationship between that country and the United States is maybe at a crossroads. It's changing drastically, and it's most clear in the Democratic Party, but there are Republican voices who say similar things. How significant, again, is this going to be in the Democratic Party in these primaries this year, and what will take place in the years to come?
I mean, I think for my entire life, support for Israel has been bipartisan. In both parties supported American support for Israel overwhelmingly. And, I think it was a huge mistake for Benjamin Netanyahu to come out and support Donald Trump so publicly, and essentially turn support for Israel into a partisan issue in the United States. And today, something like 80% of Democrats oppose continued funding for military funding for Israel. And it's becoming almost like a test, right? Like, do you want to keep sending weapons overseas to a foreign country? And before Netanyahu had gotten involved with domestic American politics, we supported our ally in the Middle East, our biggest ally in the Middle East. But now, the government of Israel, the Prime Minister of Israel, has inserted himself into domestic American politics with predictable results. And maybe that will change when Netanyahu's not Prime Minister anymore. But today, the AIPAC has alienated a big part of the Democratic base, in part because of their partisanship in America.
There was an interesting comment by AOC in which she said, in any other country, Joe Biden and she would not be in the same party. But in America, we are. And of course, she's referring to the fact that moderate politicians and progressive politicians will belong to separate parties in other countries, separate and distinct parties. Now, with the emergence of the DSA, do you get a sense that they are content with being a wing or faction within the Democratic Party? Or realistically, do they want to take over the Democratic Party?
I don't think it matters. because I think that parties change. You know, the Democratic Party of today is very different than the Democratic Party of the Civil War. It's very different than the Democratic Party before FDR. Parties change, and it's influences like the DSA that change them. And it's okay, you know, parties can change, and it's a healthy part of the American political process for parties to evolve. And if we evolve into a party that's more focused on affordability, that's more focused on keeping costs low, that's more focused on preventing extreme wealth inequality, a capitalist system that is well regulated, prevents monopolies, you know, if we transform into a party that is focused on that, healthcare for all, climate change, that's okay. Like, if that's what it means for the DSA to take over the Democratic Party, I think that's okay.
Of course, President Trump refers to the DSA as communist. Now, I know that's an exaggeration, but does that equate with what I remember as the red baiting of the 1950s during the McCarthy era?
Look, I don't purport to be a scholar on the differences between socialism and communism and you know what Republicans and Democrats think of each. I think Donald Trump just says a lot of random stuff, and I'm going to throw that in the bucket of his lengthy screeds on Truth Social. I can't really take him seriously anymore.
Okay, but in your opinion, what is the platform of the DSA?
My understanding is that their core tenets are cost of living, affordability, climate change. The Republicans, certain Republican outlets have asserted that part of their platform is like abolishing the Senate, sort of more extreme proposals like that. There was another one, reducing the power of the presidency, making it subservient to the Supreme Court and Congress. You know, I don't think that's such a bad idea. The president is too powerful. It's only gotten more powerful with these recent Supreme Court decisions. Congress is supposed to be the most powerful branch. So if the DSA's platform, if Republican criticism of the DSA is that the DSA thinks the president should be less powerful, well, okay, guilty as charged. I think it is fine for the president, the office of the president, to be less powerful than Congress and less powerful than the Supreme Court.
Well, I'm sure that the DSA, like every other political group, has a variety of opinions. Having said that, it's time for another short break, so please stay tuned as we continue our conversation. We'll return with Harry Khanna and more on Inside Scoop.
Old man Hennessy's window.
Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball.
This is really bad. What are we gonna do?
We?
Go to the door, ask for the ball back. Are you serious?
It's my ball, Myrtleback.
You're so dead.
I'd run away.
Yeah, to Uruguay.
Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry.
Let's go.
Dad.
See you, dude. See ya. Remember me and your well.
Nice one. Some friends you are.
Hi. Tell him it was an accident. And we can fix the window. Come on. I'll come with you.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's a matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice. Holy smiles. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Yeah.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again.
But an awkward silence can be a great thing.
Like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
I am Russell Brooks, joined by tonight's guest, Harry Khanna, one of Virginia's representatives on the Democratic National Committee. Now, prior to the recent controversies concerning Graham Plattner or the rise of the DSA, the Democratic Party was grappling with the fallout from that autopsy of the 2024 presidential campaign. Initially, there was a refusal to release the autopsy, and then once it was released, there was criticism of the quality of the report. Please offer your perspective on what happened.
I don't have a lot of good things to say about the autopsy or the after-action report, I think is its formal name. It was a failure kind of top to bottom. And I really see the failure on three different dimensions. It was a failure of process, it was a failure substantively, and it was a failure of politics. I will say that I am grateful it was released, because what it showed was that there was nothing specific that someone was trying to hide. It was really more just the embarrassment of, like, we flubbed this process. We commissioned a report that went nowhere, that was a mess from a consultant, and we're embarrassed by it. And I prefer that to we are hiding something specific about Joe Biden's health or something substantive that goes to the election. Now, it was a failure of process because I think the chairman engaged a consultant that he knew, that he thought would do a good job. The consultant did not do a good job. The consultant produced this halfway report and would not provide sources, would not provide interviews, and my understanding is that the DNC couldn't stand behind it, right? They couldn't take these half-baked conclusions and not have any sources and say this is the report of the DNC. And so you'll see, like, on every page, there's like big red letters. This is not the opinion of the DNC. The DNC does not endorse this. It was released because people wanted to see what was there, but it's bad. It was a failure substantively because it discusses some things that I think we all know to be true about the 2024 election. Something I said earlier was that we positioned ourselves as anti-Trump, as this is what we are not. And there was very little of this is what we are for. And that is mentioned in the report, and I think that is certainly part of what happened in 2024. But it also leaves out some things that I think people know had an impact. There was the impact of the uncommitted movement in Israel and Gaza. It was the impact of Joe Biden dropping out with 107 days until the election and having to nominate a replacement quickly. So that was not in the report. So substantively, the report had a lot of problems too. And then it was just bad politics. It was we're going to commission a report, we're going to do a report, but oh wait, we're not going to release it now. But okay, now we're going to release it. So just the politics were also badly handled. So it was a mess, every way I can think of. But I don't believe there was anything malicious there or anything like willfully hidden, which I'm grateful for.
So was anything learned from this autopsy, or was it just a waste of time and resources?
I think it was a waste of time and resources.
Okay. And based on some of the things that you just described, do you believe Democrats were just irreversibly handicapped by President Biden's decision to run for re-election?
I don't think we were irreversibly handicapped. I think we were handicapped. But I think we could have still won that election. And I think it could have been won by, first and foremost, saying what we are for, by staking out positions of this is what we stand for as Democrats. I think one of the things that absolutely crushed us was when Vice President Harris was asked, what would you do differently than Joe Biden? And I think her answer was something along the lines of, there's nothing I can think of.
Yeah,
and I think
nothing comes to mind.
Yeah, nothing comes to mind. And I think at that height of frustration with President Biden, that was the wrong answer. And it showed that, with cost of living and all the economic problems that were going on in 2024 and that are still going on today, they're worse today, it was a bit tone deaf, and it made it seem like the Democrats were not going to solve the problems that Americans were facing.
Sure. So how much responsibility must the Harris campaign take for this loss?
I mean, I think a lot of it. I mean, I'm not going to discount the fact that they only had 107 days to run an election, but it was a bargain. It was a bargain that she took that we can't forget. She didn't have to run in a primary, right? She did run in a primary in 2020, and she didn't even make it to the Iowa caucuses. So she got to skip the primary this time and go straight into election, but the bargain was that she'd only have 107 days to do it. And she took that trade. And you know, I think that was really hard to pull off a campaign in 107 days, but she got to inherit the entire war chest from the Biden-Harris campaign when it became the Harris-Walz campaign. So she wasn't starting with a huge fundraising disadvantage. And yeah, it's really hard to run a campaign in 107 days. But I'll also say this, the height of her polling when she was doing best was right after Joe Biden dropped out. The longer she had in the race, the worse she did. Her poll numbers dropped. So I'm not convinced that more time would have helped her. I think it may have only hurt her.
Okay. One weakness was the number of Democrats or potential Democrats who just didn't vote. Will there be a Democratic push this cycle to get those voters off the couch to the polls during these midterms?
Yes, and there already is. Democrats are engaging in partisan voter registration, I think, for the first time in a long time. And we are registering new voters. We are out making inroads with folks that didn't vote or voted Trump and who are unhappy with the way things are going. Donald Trump promised a lot of things. No new wars was Donald Trump. He said that if Kamala Harris became president, we'd be in a war with Iran. Well, guess what? Donald Trump started that war with Iran for no reason, and now we're all suffering for it.
The Democratic Party also lost favor with Latinos and young voters. Are those weaknesses being addressed?
Yeah, there's a lot of work going on that. And I don't know the details of what we're doing in every state, in every community, but I know there is a focus on that. And a lot of folks, especially in the Latino community, I have some friends in Texas that have told me that a lot of the folks who voted for Donald Trump or didn't vote are really upset with his cruel and inhumane deportation policies. There's a lot of folks, especially in South Texas, who have businesses where their workers have been rounded up and deported, or they're scared to come to work, and that's just destroying the economies around them. And so I think a lot of those folks have seen that Donald Trump is, he said he was just going to go after the worst of the worst, the criminals, and he lied. I mean, many of us knew he was lying, but I think a lot of the folks who sat out that election can see it clearly now. A lot of the folks who voted for him can see it clearly now, and I think they'll come home to the Democratic Party.
Has there been a final decision on the order of the Democratic parties in 2028? Will New Hampshire lead off like normal, or where will the Iowa caucuses fall in the campaign calendar?
That's a good question. It has not been finalized yet. I think it will be finalized at our August meeting, or maybe the one after that. But I can say that Virginia is in the running to be an early state. So I'm not on the Rules and Bylaws Committee, which is the one that makes the recommendation to the full DNC of the order of states. But my hope is that they choose Virginia as one of the early states. I think we'd be a great candidate. We've got a legislature that will work with the DNC to move our primary date around so that we can be an early state. You can't say the same for some of these other states. In the mix, they don't have legislatures that are willing to cooperate. So I don't have an answer for you on what the order is, but my prayer is that Virginia is one of those early states.
Well, I'm sure many Virginians join you in that prayer. Now, the Supreme Court, in one of its final decisions of its just concluded term, lifted long-standing limits on the amount that political parties could spend in direct coordination with candidates. The National Republican Senatorial Committee was one of the parties in the case. How do you see the decision affecting the activities of both the DNC and the RNC?
I think this case was really about one thing, if I can kind of look underneath it. I think this was about allowing political parties with big war chests to get the benefit of the lower TV advertising rates of candidates. And this is just another nail in the coffin of campaign finance in the United States. It has been a 40-year Republican project to steadily erode and eliminate campaign finance regulations in the United States so that big money can influence elections. And boy, have they been successful. Citizens United was a gut punch. And this latest case is just part of that. And it's going to worsen the influence of money in politics. And it's hard to imagine it getting much worse, right? When you have a trillionaire spending on behalf of Republicans, it's hard to imagine it getting much worse. But Republicans are trying, and it is To me, it is when you've got one party that is trying to limit the influence of money in politics and the other side who's trying to worsen the influence of money in politics. To me, it's clear which side has the better moral argument. But I think Democrats have to make the case to the American people and get folks to understand that clearly, that one party is going to limit the influence of money in politics.
Mm-hmm. So, with all that being said, what effect will the decision have on these upcoming midterms?
I think it will help the Republicans. I think it'll help them big time. I mean, just look at the numbers. The Democrats' net cash position is like -3 million. So they've got a line of credit they've drawn down, and they don't have a lot of cash on hand. So they're in the hole. And Republicans have like almost $100 million in cash. And remember what I said about parties being able to take advantage of the lower TV advertising rates? Well, Republicans are really going to be able to take advantage of that, and the Democrats just don't have the same amount of money to keep up. So I think it will help Republicans. Sure. As it seems like, for whatever reason, all these recent Supreme Court decisions seem to benefit Republicans. I can't really figure out why.
Might have something to do with the ideology of the majority.
Yeah.
Now, without a doubt, the Republicans have plenty of money for the midterms. What can the Democrats do in response?
I think that our cash on hand position is not good, as I just said. But it is not materially worse than any other year where we don't have the White House in a midterm like this. It's a little bit worse, but it's not much worse. And donors are sitting on the sidelines for a lot of different reasons. But one of them is that major donors are worried about retaliation from Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. In sort of an unprecedented way, the president is willing to use the levers of government to punish his political adversaries. And I think a lot of major donors who have businesses, who are business leaders in the country, they're worried about what it would mean if they support the Democratic Party. So our fundraising is not good, but it's not much worse than an off year. But I do think it will really pick up once our primary season starts and people start to get energized by the candidates that are out there. I do think that our fundraising at the DNC will pick up.
So enthusiasm for Democrats, desire to make a change may overcome the monetary advantage that the Republicans will have.
Yes, I have to believe that's true.
Well, we certainly hope it's true.
Yeah.
Well, once again, we're going to have to take another short break, but it's been a riveting conversation, so I hope our audience will stay with us when we conclude with our final segment, when we return with more of Inside Scoop and our guest, Harry Khanna of the Democratic National Committee. Stay tuned.
So, I just moved in with this family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born and I knew how to use the litter box. Look at that. That's disgusting. Oh, poop already. You're making me nervous. Oh, okay, I can't look at this anymore. I really hope he grows out of this, for his sake.
So how was work?
It was 1,300 hours. My math class from 302 was in the trenches. Davy Roth had it the worst. Fractions were coming at him left and right. He just didn't get the damn things. 2 days ago, I tried to teach him what 1/4 of 1/2 was using different sizes of blocks. Yesterday, I tried again by dividing up pizza. Both missions failed.
Oh, no.
But today, I was ready. I created a combat math game where the only way to beat the enemy is to out-fraction them. Davy conquered every last denominator. My game was so successful, the principal is deploying it to math squadrons all over the school. Anywho, how was your day?
Oh, today my boss treated the office to salad wraps.
Salad wraps.
I know.
150 over 90.
180 over 111.
160 over 110. I had a stroke.
This is what high blood pressure looks like. You might not feel its symptoms, but the results from a stroke are far from invisible or silent. If you've come off your treatment plan, get back on it, or talk with your doctor to create an exercise, diet, and medication plan that works for you. Go to loweryourhbp.org.
If I would have followed a treatment plan, I would not be in this situation.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again your host.
Let's continue with Harry Khanna of the Democratic National Committee in our final segment of Inside Scoop. Returning to the Supreme Court, in a momentous decision this term, the court practically erased the notion of majority-minority districts via the Voting Rights Act. While African Americans retain the right to vote, and that is certainly an improvement over the Jim Crow era, the court was not sympathetic to their desire to have representation or representatives who share their experience. Am I misreading what happened?
No, I think that's right. This court is hostile to voting rights generally. And what they did with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act in this recent case, Louisiana versus Calais, is they didn't just declare Section 2 unconstitutional. Section 2 is the section that says that you can't, discriminate against, you can't make it harder for minority populations to vote. And that includes with maps, at least it used to include with maps, and that would result in majority-minority districts being created. And rather than just striking Section 2 down as unconstitutional, they did what the Supreme Court loves to do, which is they narrowed it with a very confusing test that is basically impossible to administer, so that they have the last word on every map. If they had just struck it down, they wouldn't be involving themselves in every map. But the way they decided this is the Supreme Court, if they want, gets to weigh in on every map in the United States if they want. And I would wager that maps that tend to benefit Republicans will survive scrutiny, and ones that tend to benefit Democrats will not.
So Southern governors and state legislatures moved promptly to eliminate districts represented by African American congresspeople under the guise of engaging in purely political gerrymandering, which the Supreme Court rules is perfectly permissible. Were these actions purely political, or were they a return to the racism of a not too distant past?
For a lot of these states, partisanship, discriminating on the basis of partisanship and discriminating on the basis of the race are very similar in a lot of these states. But I think it is striking that the day after the court weakened, gutted Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, all of these states moved to eliminate the majority-minority districts. It is, to hear Chief Justice Roberts say things like, the way to stop discriminating on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. We have a colorblind society, a colorblind constitution. And then the very next day, the thing that everyone said would happen happens. The man needs to get his head out of the sand, And I think that the best evidence for racial discrimination in our voting is, and why we needed Section 2 and why we needed Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, is the behavior of these states right after those laws were weakened.
Now, pertaining to the redistricting battles that broke out seemingly nationwide after President Trump demanded that Texas find 5 more congressional districts or seats for him, did Democrats lose that redistricting war, especially after the decision by the Virginia Supreme Court to invalidate the referendum on redistricting?
We did. We lost it. We lost that war. And part of the reason is we are in an asymmetric playing field, both a structurally asymmetric playing field and a politically asymmetric playing field. Structurally, the states that the Democrats control tend to have independent redistricting commissions. California, Virginia, and those reforms were enacted by Democrats to try and create better government, to try and reduce the influence of partisanship in maps. Republicans do not have the same scruples when it comes to good government. So they have a free hand to manipulate districts mid-decade, whereas Democrats have to do these things like Proposition 50 in California, which allowed them to temporarily override the Independent Redistricting Commission, or the referendum we passed in Virginia. And our referendum was struck down. And this is the other asymmetry I'm talking about, sort of a political asymmetry, which is the Democrats are held to the letter of every rule. Our referendum, the will of the voters, 1 million+ people voted to allow this mid-decade redistricting. And the Supreme Court of Virginia invalidated it 4-3 on a technicality. Contrast that with Florida, that just redid their maps at DeSantis' order to fully redistrict in a completely partisan way. And the Florida Constitution prohibits partisan redistricting. The Florida Constitution says no partisan redistricting. But guess what? No one expected the Florida Supreme Court to uphold that part of the Constitution because they're all appointed by Republicans. They're all appointed by DeSantis. And Republicans are simply not held to the same standard that Democrats are. Democrats have to follow the rules. But we're always climbing uphill. Republicans can do whatever they want and no one expects anything else.
Let's take it a step further. The Trump administration seems to be engaged in barely concealed voter suppression by sending threatening letters to state election officials, promising to send election monitors to blue states like Virginia, and pushing for passage of the SAVE Act, which seemingly, again, is meant to discourage people from voting. Do you view these actions as voter suppression? And if so, what is the DNC doing to fight back?
I do. I view them as attempted voter suppression. I don't think he's going to be successful. And I think it frustrates the heck out of him. Because there are so many levers that Donald Trump can pull when it comes to immigration or when it comes to funding, because those are instrumentalities of the federal government. But elections are administered by states. They're administered by counties. And Donald Trump simply has no levers to pull here. He can threaten to send election monitors. He can threaten all sorts of stuff. But an election, a midterm election, is 1 million polling places, millions of election workers, hardworking civil servants trying to administer a free and fair election. And it is simply not possible for Donald Trump to interfere at the scale that he wants to. So I think he's going to try. I don't think he'll be successful. And if you've worked at an election site before, I don't know if you've ever worked at an election, you know that it is very hard to manipulate. There are so many checks. Everything is done so by the book. There are, you put the ballots in a cage and it's locked, and that happens all around the country. And I think Donald Trump would love to manipulate this process, but he simply cannot.
Nevertheless, as you said, it appears that he will try.
He will try.
Do you expect things to get worse in terms of the things that he will attempt as perhaps the administration gets more desperate as the midterms draw closer?
I do, and I think that's why it's really important we win these midterms. We need to win. Democrats need to win at least one chamber of Congress, because we can hold hearings, we can do investigations, we can issue subpoenas if we have one of the chambers of Congress. If we don't, I think it will embolden him. I think 2028 could be bad. We saw what happened on January 6, 2021. I think we could see that on steroids in 2029 if we don't win at least one chamber this midterm election, where we can start to put a stop to some of this bad behavior.
Now, you're a lawyer. In view of the seemingly partisan decisions by this Supreme Court, how do you view calls by certain Democrats for Supreme Court reform?
Supreme Court reform is non-negotiable at this point. I think in 2020, it was a nice to have, and Joe Biden got into office and he commissioned a study, and that study went nowhere. But this time,
seemingly his heart wasn't really in it.
I don't think his heart was in it, yeah. But we can't go back to politics as usual, status quo. We tried that. We tried restoring the soul of the nation, to borrow a phrase from President Biden, but that didn't work. We didn't quite restore the soul of the nation. In fact, it's worse now, Trump's second term. So I think Supreme Court reform is table stakes for any presidential candidate. When they come calling, me and many of my fellow DNC members are going to ask, where are you on Supreme Court reform?
So what would you propose? Expanding the court, ethics reform? What would you do?
Well, it depends on whether we need a constitutional amendment or whether we can do it by statute. Mm-hmm. And we can expand the court by statute, right? That's set by law. There's no limit. There's no 9-member of Supreme Court in the Constitution. So I think step one is expanding the court. I think 13 members, given there are 13 judicial districts around the country. Let's have one Supreme Court member per district. I think ethics reform, again, table stakes. There's no reason Supreme Court justices should not be subject to the same ethics rules as the rest of the federal judiciary. And I think we can impose term limits, and we can do it without a constitutional amendment. There have been proposals introduced in Congress to adjust the appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court in such a way that most of the cases of the Supreme Court would be heard by a 9 or 13 member panel that's term limited. So lots of proposals floating around. I think many of them can be implemented without a constitutional amendment. We can do it by law. We just need the will. We need a president that's willing to lead on it, and we need to have control of Congress. And we have to abolish the filibuster to get it done.
Okay. Now, one must also note that the Trump administration was heavily influenced in its early months by the development of Project 2025. Is the DNC working on something similar? Would Supreme Court reform be a component, or strengthening the Voting Rights Act in a Project 2029?
You know, the RNC was not the one to put together Project 2025. And similarly, the DNC would not be the one to put together Project 2029. There are groups working on plans for when we take control of the White House and Congress. And a lot of that is going to be focused on the corruption that this administration has done. There are groups of experienced white-collar prosecutors that are putting plans together for how they can go after some of the more brazen corruption that this administration has done. From insider trading to the Qatari jet to all sorts of stuff. There will be consequences if we take control of the White House. There will be consequences for those who've engaged in criminal activity. But it's not the DNC who's organizing.
Understood. Again, as a lawyer, would those consequences affect a former president? Could charges be brought against President Trump after pretty much the Supreme Court has said, whatever you do under the color of being president, you cannot be held accountable for it?
Well, the decision, awful as it was not quite as absolute as that. There are still ways to prosecute a former president, even under that immunity decision. But I'll also say that when we pack the Supreme Court and make it 13 justices, maybe that decision will get overturned. It was an awful decision. Why should the president have any sort of immunity for criminal activity? And even absent that, let's say we don't expand the court. Let's say President Trump still has immunity. He has done things that are not within the absolute immunity umbrella of that decision. And I think for those things we would prosecute him, and we'd prosecute anyone in this administration that's committed criminal activity.
Well, thank you, Harry. We had a great discussion tonight, but we are out of time. So let me again thank Harry Khanna of the DNC. Thank you for coming on Inside Scoop, and I hope you will come back soon. And thank you, the audience, for tuning in. And please join us again for another edition of Inside Scoop. Have a good night.